I want everybody in the audience to imagine the challenge of commanders in the field in Gaza right now. They're having to balance two fundamental obligations. The first obligation is the obligation derived from military necessity. Do all that is necessary to bring about the prompt submission of your enemy in the most efficient manner possible. That's what military necessity means. In military terms, military commanders would tell you, my mission is to use combined arms, fire, and maneuver to close with and destroy my enemy. That's what commanders are taught. That's the violence of conflict. But they have to balance that aggression against international humanitarian law's most fundamental obligation, which is the constant care obligation. When they know their operations will put civilians in jeopardy, even civilians who might hate them or might actually support the cause of their enemy, civilians, meaning not members of the enemy armed group, they must take constant care to do all that is operationally feasible to mitigate the risk to the civilian population. That means that before they launch an attack, whether it's a drone attack or dropping a bomb or a tank commander firing a tank round in the streets of Gaza, we need those combat leaders to constantly be asking, what can I do that will achieve my military objective, but will also mitigate civilian risk as much as feasible? Now, they're not required under the law to implement measures that compromise their military advantage. Although, to be candid, the IDF does this routinely. They assume greater risk. For example, we know now that Hamas has military assets under the Al-Shifa hospital. Israel decided to conduct a ground raid into the hospital. If you've been in the military, you know that a ground raid against an embedded enemy is one of the most dangerous missions you can conduct. I think legally, had I been the legal advisor, I probably would have advised the commander, you're not legally obligated to do that to reduce risk to the hospital. You could use standoff capability to try and attack that target. But obviously, there was the decision that even though we might not have to use that tactic, we are going to use that tactic because we're trying our level best to mitigate the risk to the civilian population, the hospital, the patients. And we know now that right behind the raid came what? Medical supplies, Arabic speakers, medical personnel to try and, as best we can, reduce the risk to the civilian population. These are called precautionary measures. And there are, from a tactical standpoint, there are a lot of things a commander can do or consider to reduce risk. Timing of attack, weapons package, alternate tactics, warnings, evacuations. These are the standards by which we should judge the credibility of commitment to international humanitarian law and the conduct of hostilities. And the enemy bears an obligation as well. They bear a constant care obligation as well. And there are two fundamental things the enemy should be doing to mitigate civilian risk. Number one, wear some type of uniform so that your opponent can distinguish, as Arthur said, between who can be the lawful object of attack and who should not be. Because if you don't wear a uniform, you are going to exponentially increase the risk of mistake. And those mistakes will be reasonable, but they'll be tragic. And number two, avoid putting your military assets in the midst of the civilian population. And we know that on this ledger, the IDF is trying its best to mitigate risk, and Hamas is trying its best to exacerbate risk. And for me, that is the ultimate touchstone of respect for the law during the conduct of hostilities and responsible battle command. And on that ledger, there's no moral equivalency.